Yeah, so I requested extra dim lighting because, and even this is going to go off by the way because I'm very particular about the visuals, and most of my films are kind of really dark. So half the times we use very low lighting. So yeah, I mean the thing is for those of you who know me and those of you who don't, the idea of this is to keep it as less about me as possible and as much about movies, as much about TV, as much as possible about the industry and where we are headed right now. So, yeah, this is me. This is something we're going to come back to towards the end because the idea is to sort of like create a debate and see what we are, where we are today in the film industry as well as like audiences. So, how does an artist make a choice between an indie and a mainstream film? Is there a choice? Would you rather tell your stories exactly the way you want to tell them and speak to a few people, which is like a small independent film? Or would you speak to a lot of people and change the way you say what you want to say? Uh, so, the last point, which is I think particular to people here, is that Goan films have a bigger audience outside of Goa than in Goa. This is something I've experienced for the longest, for the past 10 years or so. How does that affect Goan storytelling? So these are just some of the points we're going to come back to. Before we start, like, have you guys heard the word indie or is this something that's new to you all? Have you all heard it? Okay, great. So just like to bear in mind, everything we discuss will also be true to music, art, literature, politics, business, fashion, and even sports, I think. Not just movies. So the indie mainstream debate applies to almost everything. Of course, I'll talk about movies. So, what is an indie film? An indie film is basically anything that's produced outside a major film studio system as a very specific style and vision. Typically, just low budget films made with some sense of artistic purpose. Resistance, breaking norms, low budgets, intricate styles, all this stuff. Movies from the soul is what I like to call them. Uh, Low budget is something that might not be true today. There's still some indie films that are being made which will still cost, $50 million and stuff like that, but they're still indie at heart, right? So, what is mainstream cinema? Well, everything else. So, when an artist starts out, so this is something like before I talk about myself, I want to just like have a little bit of a conversation on Indian mainstream with two examples, right? Three examples actually. So, when an artist starts out, are they indie or are they mainstream? So, we'll take two examples. One is Greta Gerwig. How many of you have seen Barbie? Okay. And how many of you have seen Lady Bird? Interesting. That's why I like more. So, Lady Bird is a film that Greta Gerwig made in 2017. It's a very personal film. It's an indie film at heart. It's about this young girl who's like navigating her way through her life and deals with her equation with her mother. And it's a really good film. I'm not saying Barbie is not a good film, but it's a completely different vehicle, right? So Greta is an example of someone who started off in the indie space and then completely took on the mainstream, sort of got onto the mainstream bandwagon, and now I hear she's making Narnia. So her journey and her path is very clear what she's chosen. But that's not true for all filmmakers. I don't know if you've heard of Darren Aronofsky. Darren Aronofsky is one of my favorite filmmakers. He started making his films like in the late 1990s. He made a film called Pi, which is now classified as brain horror. It doesn't really have a genre. It's about a guy who's a scientist, and sort of it's shot in like a very it's shot in black and white. It's grainy. It's strange. It did really well at that time at festivals and otherwise. And almost 30 years later, he's still making films that are indie. Yes, this has Jennifer Lawrence, but it's still a weird film. It's still obscure. It's still, away from the grain, right? So this is an example of a filmmaker who is staying indie. So now let's look at India. I guess you guys very well know what the state of our film industry is, but what factors come into play? So let's take a look at two films. Okay, now again I'm going to do a little bit of audience, so market research. How many of you have seen Joram? Okay, and how many of you have seen Gadar 2? This is great. I like this audience. So Gadar 2 made 525.45 crores in India alone. Joram made 40 lakhs. Now, this is not to say that, either film is good or bad or anything, but the direction, we must remember that the way the industry moves is towards the trade, not against it. The trade will suggest that we need to make more films like Gadar. Which is why they work a few times and then they completely don't work after that because you keep following the same model. While Joram, which is a great film and probably one of Manoj Bajpayee's best performances to this day, wins all sorts of awards abroad, does really well, but in India, it's not really received well, right? So, what is the trade going to say when a young filmmaker goes to the studio and says, "I want to make a film"? Are they going to allow him or her to make a Joram, or are they going to encourage a Gadar too? And that's something that we are dealing with because Indian mainstream exists outside. It exists in France, it exists in America, it exists in Australia, it exists everywhere. But the gap between the Indian mainstream is a lot more in India. So this is what I want to talk about. Bridging that gap. Like how do you bridge the gap between these two? Like it's a huge sort of disparity. Polar opposite sensibility. So the person who's going to watch Joram will most likely not be interested in Gadar, and the person who's going to watch Gadar may or may not be interested in Joram. So how do you find your audience? Where is that audience? When are they going and watching these movies? Can you afford to release a Joram in theaters? After you pay your entertainment tax and you cut everything, how much money does a producer is a producer even left with after making a film like Joram? Whereas Gadar is just returns and returns and returns, right? Uh, then there's this whole debate of stars versus non-stars. Then there's this whole conversation about PR agencies and PAPs and where we are sort of headed. This I'm going to come back to with the Amazon show that I did towards the end. But before that, let's take a look at the kind of films that I've made. So yeah, so this is like a bit of a precursor, and now I'm going to show you everything I've done, pretty much just like clips from the films, going back 10 years. So 10 years ago, I was in college and there was this film sort of event, and people were saying, I had come out of film school, so everyone was expecting me to do something good. And I think one of the things about expectations is when you want to do indie films, you're almost like you want to belie expectations in some way. You want to do something completely opposite of what is expected from you because otherwise it makes no sense. So here's a film I made called Enigma. I mean, you can read about it, but I'm going to say it. When an obsessive writer begins to feel like he hasn't faced the challenges and difficulties faced by those he admires, he sets out on a journey to complicate his own life, causing his hallucinations and reality to merge. Now, when I suggested this to the professor in the college that I went to, he was like, why do you want to make this film? And I had no answer for that. I mean, I said, maybe I want to discover why I want to make it by making it, you know. Everybody at that time, I don't know if you remember what short film situation was in 2014, but it was mostly like there were a lot of these short films that were blowing up on YouTube, and there were a lot of these films with like a message, like people thought that you should make a short film that's probably 10 minutes long, not longer than that. Each short film must end with some kind of a positive message and about humanity and love and all of that. And I didn't see short films like that. I saw them as an opportunity to tell a story that is maybe different, weird, which you will never get to make on a mainstream level because nobody will allow you to make it. All right, so that's when I decided to make this. So this film, when we screened it, there were lots of people who came to watch it in the hall and everything, and nobody understood what it was. Uh, the idea was, and the clip I'm going to show you is basically a scene in which this writer is trying to write a script, but he's unable to write it because he's disturbed by his own hallucinations of his own success. Now, it might sound bizarre because it is bizarre, but we had obviously absolutely no money to make this film. So we decided to design a room in like blue colored lighting to make it look like it was like a hallucination. So we're going to see a clip, and what I want from you guys is like, we'll watch clips from all my films, and one film we'll watch in completion. So at the end of it, when we do a brief Q&A, maybe you can see commonalities between the films, maybe you can see mistakes, maybe you can see what is different. Yeah, who knows. So here's a clip from Enigma. Yeah, so this is a clip from the film, and it's safe to say that nobody understood what the hell was going on. And at the end of it, the judges who came from the film industry basically gave me a list of things that I should never do in a film. One is to make a film that people don't understand. Two is to make a film about brooding characters. Three is to, cut in this weird way, between one room and another, actors doing strange stuff. And I'm proud to say that I did each one of those things in everything that I've done. And I think it's like the one thing I always say is like if anyone comes to me with an idea, so I never tell anyone something that they should not do. I think that's something that they should discover themselves. But you know, that when someone says something to you, it sort of motivates you to go and do that again, which I guess is just me, but whatever. So the next film I made was a film called Kazu, which we will watch today. Um, this I think it's just best to discuss it when we watch it because this was the one that actually really worked for us. We were just a bunch of 20-year-olds who wanted to like essentially there was this festival that was happening in Goa where there were it was like a Kazoo festival or something like that, and Marius Fernandez was sort of organizing that. Uh, he came to me and said, "Can you like shoot a video or something? You know how these guys do the casual stuff." I said, "Okay, sure." Uh, and then we went to shoot it, and then while shooting it, we realized that there's a story here that nobody's sort of looking at, and it's about two things. One, a generational difference that the younger generation has no interest in doing, Feni and Urak production because they just feel it's dirty, it smells, all that. And of course, they want to study, they want to go ahead in life and all that. And then there's this huge pressure put on these local distillers by the factories and all these guys who basically buy their stuff for very cheap, like maybe 50-80 bucks a bottle, and then they sell it for like 400-500 bucks. And I thought, okay, there's a story there, and then we made the film. uh, Initially when the film came out, nobody reacted positively because people were like, if you're making a short film, why is it a documentary? If you're making a documentary, why is it a short film? So that was a problem because the short documentaries didn't really exist at that point. And in 2015, film festivals, Goan films, it wasn't really happening. So once we got rejected by everyone in Goa, we decided to send it abroad. And as luck would have it, in India, when something wins awards abroad, immediately at home you get all the attention that you hadn't got before. So yeah, we won a couple of awards. It went to like number of countries. It went to Italy. It went to New Zealand. It went to America. It went to a really prestigious festival in France called Grenoble. It won an award at RIF. And then it sort of created a conversation, and then more Goan films started going out. And if there's anything I'm proud of about this film, is less about the film and more about the fact that a lot of other young Goan filmmakers came out after that and decided that if we may or may not have an audience in Goa, we might have an audience abroad. And then we sort of like sought out markets abroad, and then we learned about film festivals and how, initially when you send a film to film festivals, you think everyone's going to accept it or everyone's going to reject it. But then you learn slowly that what festivals are looking for what kind of a film. I'm still learning, of course, but this film taught us a lot. After that, this film we'll watch towards the end. After that, when something works, the first thing you do is a mistake. I don't want to call this film a mistake, but essentially, I went back in the zone of Enigma, which is something I should not have done at this point. But a friend of mine who I was working with at that point had this idea that, he said to me, Ronak, why don't we make a short film that is like a play? I said, okay, sounds weird enough to me. Then he said, imagine the situation. Okay, elder brother, wife, younger brother. Elder brother is pissed off at the younger brother because he's just come out of jail. And the younger brother has to spend the night at his elder brother's house. I was like, okay, how do I write that? But okay, fine. So then I wrote it. And what came out was a film called Scars. And the idea behind the film was to really show what happens inside these families or any family when there is something you want to talk about but you don't talk about it, right? There are a lot of these silences where people speak about things that are not exactly about what they should speak about. They address everything else because they just don't want to talk about the matter at hand. So I took it two steps weirder. I shot the whole film in black and white because I thought that the film was about the elder brother forgiving the younger brother. So I shot the whole film in black and white, and the last shot of the film is in color when he decides to forgive him. But an interesting thing that happened was in 2016, Nilankur, who's here right now, had organized a festival of short films, I think, in Six Asagaon, and we screened Kazu there. And there was this captain who came for the screening, who really liked the film. He contacted me somehow, found my number, and then he said that he has this really old camera that he wants to gift to us. I said no, we don't, please, no, no, all that. But he kept insisting. And so after a while, he said, it's of no use to me, you take it and all that stuff. I said, okay, you know what, let's take it. And then we took it. And then I said, what do I do with this camera? The camera was a handy cam, and nobody shoots on handy cam. And how do I tell a senior person that, we don't shoot on handy cams anymore? Uh, then I thought maybe I can use it in scars. And the idea of using it in scars was when the elder brother sort of has this revelry, or he sort of remembers his younger brother, maybe I can shoot that on a handycam. It'll be weird, but it will look like a memory. It'll look like he's sort of reminiscing the good moments with his younger brother. And that ended up being the part of the film that really worked. And I actually shot that on a handycam. I'm going to show it to you. The whole point of it was we should break every rule of filmmaking. We should shoot it like it is shot by someone who doesn't know how to shoot anything. And it should look hazy, it should look strange, but it will feel like a memory. So, yeah, that's why people didn't get it. That was the end of the film. I mean, obviously, the film is 20 minutes long, and the idea was that the elder brother sort of has this memory, and then after that decides to forgive his younger brother, and then the film ends at that point. But yeah, I mean, Kazu did so well for us, and this film didn't really work. So in 2017, I got to a point where I said, why should I even make short films anymore? What's the point? Because the films go to festivals. If you're lucky, they win an award. But there's no real market, and this was the time when Goan audiences were just starting to come out and watch Goan films, right? So I said, I don't want to make a short film anymore. So I waited 3 years, and then something happened. Uh, there was this thing I read in the newspapers about this one man who would uh, creep into women's apartments to watch them sleep. And when I read it at first, I said, this sounds like my next film. Uh, and then I thought, it's just going to be another, film which is like crazy and different, and nobody's going to receive it well. Forget it. So I spent 6 months, but that stayed at the back of my head, that this is really weird. Like, he went into apartments and he wasn't caught for months. And what he was doing, he was watching them sleep. Like, what? Uh, but then 6 months later, Me Too happened. And when the Me Too movement happened, obviously it was harrowing to hear about all these experiences. But what was more harrowing for me personally was this sort of victim questioning that started to happen. And everybody was saying to victims, why is she speaking about this now? Why is she coming out after 10 years? Why is she, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, wait, it's probably really hard for her to say this. So why is your question about the victim? Then I thought, why don't I take the story of this man and then create a fictional character of a woman who experiences this and nobody believes her? Then maybe it can be a film. And that's when it ended up becoming the most successful film we've done, because it went to a lot of festivals. It sort of spoke. It won us a lot of awards. It won me an award. And it sort of told me that, the idea to make indie films in Goa is to really tell Goan stories, to be as rooted as possible, to be as stuck to the ground as possible. That will speak to people in Scandinavia better than me trying to be like a Scandinavian filmmaker, So we'll watch a clip from there. We will need the lights to be off. So yeah, that when we were doing it, I mean, it was so obscure, and a lot of people said, is this the film you want to make, and all of that. And but it ended up getting ripped out of the soul because of how personal it was and what I felt about the whole victim situation, and it worked really well for us. Uh, there's also been another film, before I get to the Amazon stuff, there's been another film that's been sort of in the works for the past 6 years. Some of you all know about it. It's unreleased. We're still sort of finding a distribution strategy for it. It's been screened abroad once at Museo de Orient in Lisbon. It's about this great artist called Vamana Navelkar. I shot it over 6 years. I kept meeting him, and he kept sort of giving us this insight about his life. And he had a similar story to what we understood about how he became really successful in Europe, but in India, especially in Goa, a lot of people took advantage of him. A lot of people never valued him. They didn't really care for him. They didn't, so the usual thing. And he was really successful in Europe, and his art is incredible, and that spoke to me a lot. So I decided to shoot a film. I had no plan about what I was going to do with it. I just said I have to make this film, um, and I'm going to show you a trailer from that of that. So, I mean, I don't know if you saw it in this, but a couple of things that I've been talking about here about publicity and all of that. I mean, Kamana said it all, and he said it like 6 years ago. So, talking about publicity, at some point in 2017, I decided, okay, like when Scars wasn't working and stuff, I said, because if Scars had worked, I probably would have taken a very different route in my life. Because Scars didn't work at that time, I said, I don't want to be stuck making short films that a few people watch. I want to go wide. So then I was lucky enough to get the opportunity to write a show called P.I. Meena. It took 3 or 4 years until the writing was complete. COVID hit in the middle, so the writing had to stop, and then of course we shot during the pandemic. So it was a really tough one to pull off. Um, but at the end of it created something that I'm quite proud of. So we're just going to watch the trailer of that, or maybe a small clip, and then we can talk about it, and then I think we'll show the show class. Yeah, so one way of looking at it is to think that I went mainstream, but the other way of looking at it is to think that compared to the other shows, I mean, we did do well. We were trending for 3 or 4 weeks, which is pretty good during Diwali, but then, in terms of the big numbers, if you see the Fuzzies and the Guns and Gulabs, we weren't on that level. Um, so that brings me to the final point of, this discussion, is what are the factors that come into play in the movie space today? You have marketing and PR budgets that are not, the same for every film or TV show. Mounting a campaign around a star versus not mounting a campaign around a star, or mounting a campaign around someone who's not a star. See, it's one way you can make a campaign around Shahid because he's a big star. How does one mount a campaign around Tanya? Right, Tanya is a fantastic actor, but it's like the PR agencies don't have a sample space of how to create that kind of a campaign. Uh, but it's the thing that no, I'm not the only one to face. There are lots of people who face it. Uh, Depth and character versus entertainment. So what I mean by this is P.I. Meena was a show that again is ripped from the soul. It's about this young woman who's a private detective, and there's a lot of men around her who keep telling her how she should do her job, and she has to navigate her way through that. And it's really about this woman who carries emotional baggage, who carries all sorts of things, and also is like gets into dangerous situations without men, and that's something that is very difficult to sell, unfortunately. And I think that that's like if you see the kind of shows that are coming out in this country, and you see the kind of films that are coming out, you'll be able to count the amount of female-led films on your fingers. They are that less, and it's not because we don't have great actors. It's not because we don't have great stories. There are a lot of people. There are a lot of middlemen who are probably afraid of making those films, right? Because it's much easier to sell a Farzi than it is to sell a piano. So those are some of the things that we deal with. Um, and with that, we're going to come to an end of this part. Then we will sort of watch Kazu, and then we can get back to the discussion. But I want to end with this lovely saying by Vamana Navalkar, whom I made the film. He said, art has to be liberal. And I live by that, because what that means is, it means a lot of things. Obviously, it talks about censorship and all that, but I think it also means that as an artist, you should be doing everything. As an artist, you should try to do everything. And that's what he was a great mentor for me and for some other people in this room right now. So, yeah, with that, I think we should move to the screening, and then we can have a chat at the end of it.